This tutorial is sponsored by Ryzen UV, a cutting-edge UV-focused software designed to get you the best UVs possible, quickly and easily. If you're looking to step up your UV game and would like an all-in-one UV software package, Ryzen UV has it all. For 20% off your very own copy of Ryzen UV, use coupon code THANKSDylan at checkout during the first month of this video's release. For additional learning resources and information on Ryzen UV, check out their Discord server filled with hundreds of 3D artists. Link in the description below. Finally, stick around until later in this video to hear my first impressions and see a quick demo of Ryzen UV in action. Thanks Ryzen for sponsoring this video. How's it going, everyone? My name is Dylan Abernathy and I'm an environment artist working in the games industry, and thanks for taking the time to come check out this video. For those of you who have watched my content before, this is probably already something a little bit new. I decided to throw up the webcam here and show you guys what I look like. I think other than my Twitter and ArtStation profile, I don't really have any pictures of me out there anywhere or any videos, so I think at the start of tutorials it could be cool to do a quick little intro like this with the video turned on. So with that said, what is this video that we're going to be doing today? I thought what I could do is make a tutorial on game floors and interiors. So think broken tiles or broken concrete or something like that on the interior of a game environment, how exactly we could go about doing that, and we're going to be using tiling textures and trim sheets to get the job done. I also wanted to do something cool and use a game that I really like as an example, and we can sort of go through breaking down how they might have done it in their game and how we can recreate it on our end. Now the funny thing about that is though, even though I work in games and I really like playing games, I feel like over the past couple of years I really haven't had a lot of time to do that. I always make some time to play some multiplayer games with friends whenever I can, things like League of Legends, and I always put aside some time as well to play arcade games whenever I can. But big AAA experiences have kind of been few and far between for me over the past couple of years. With that said though, the series we're going to be talking about today has been a pretty big exception to that rule. The Nier series of games have always been an unexpected treat for me ever since 2017 when I first came across Automata. The music, story, and gameplay are all 10 out of 10 in my opinion, and because of so, I really wanted to use the series as kind of an example for my new tutorial. I think for those of you just getting into game art, there's no better example of what the hypothetical quality bar to aim for is other than actual games themselves, so I really wanted to use one in this tutorial. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the Nier series has never been leading the charge as far as graphics go. Its strength in that sense comes more from immersion, how the art style, the music, and the narrative blend together to make things feel very real. The graphics themselves are a bit lackluster, but they still have quite a lot of charm to them. So with that in mind, I thought we could use their simpler visuals for a really great learning exercise and an easy jumping off point for beginners. In this tutorial, I thought what we could do is take a look at the village library from Nier Replicant and go over how we can recreate this patterned tile floor. For this process, we're going to be going over just how powerful trim sheets and tiling textures truly are. If this is something that you want to learn more about, I actually just released a full free tutorial series covering this topic on my channel, so I'll have a link to that in the description below for you guys. For this video, however, we're going to be just going over how to create custom interior floors for our environments, one clean version and one damaged version. So with that said, let's go ahead and hop over to Maya and get started. Alright, so here we are inside of Maya now. As you guys can see, I've gone ahead and done quite a bit of the groundwork here for us. Just pretty much wanted to get rid of all the tedious stuff, the stuff that was just going to be a lot of tinkering and measurements and all that. I'm still going to go over exactly what this is. I'd imagine for some of you guys who are watching this tutorial, you might be a little bit new to things and you might not fully understand this, and also this is just very much like my method, right? So not everyone is going to look at this and know exactly how I came to my conclusions here, so yeah, I just got rid of this stuff at the start just to sort of speed things up a little bit, but I will be going over exactly what's going on here. So let's start off with how I thought that they've gone ahead and made this floor. So here's the pattern here. I just sort of have some screenshots inside of PureRef for us. And the first time I was looking at this, I assumed that it was going to be something along the lines of one tiling material for these sort of whiter square tiles here, and then one trim material to make these sort of rounded parts. But after looking into it a little bit more, I figured it's probably all of this on just one material. And the reason I came to that conclusion is because there's like weird cuts and stuff going on everywhere. Like you can see here, for example, that we clearly cut the material, and it's not perfectly lined up, so we're not getting this grout line here, so it gives away where we've cut part of the floor. We also have parts of the tile here where it's just repeating a little too close. Like if this was a normal tiling material, there'd be no reason to have two identical tiles right next to each other. And you see that all over the place. Like there it is again there. This tile and this tile are the same. You can pretty much go anywhere on here and you're going to find things that are just a little bit too close. Like this tile, this tile and this tile here, this tile and this tile here. Like if this was a proper 2K tiling texture, they'd be spread out way more. So things are clearly being cut up. You can kind of tell like this is a cut line here, this is a cut line here, this is a cut line here, just because of like how perfectly straight things are. And since there's so many cuts, I was led to believe that we probably have this tiling material here and this tiling trim on the same material. So I set it up like so. I've divided things up into fifths, and just by looking at this, we can see that these two mini ones take up the spot of one of these standard tiles. So I just sort of have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these guys. And for the final tile spot, I have these two miniature ones. And it's set up in a way where if I start tiling this, I guess I should put the pivot there. Let's turn off the grid. These are going to tile perfectly, right? The downside to this, though, as a trim, is if we want to tile things like this, we're not going to be able to get these white tiles tiling vertically, only horizontally. So if we look at this sort of mock placement here, you can see things are going great horizontally, but vertically we're starting to get this like weird, you know, trim double tile thing here right in the middle where we don't really want it. But if we cut things up, we can layer our UVs to sort of get rid of that effect, and that's how I think they sort of got away with it here. But anyways, before we go too far, let's talk about how exactly I went ahead and made this to begin with. I'm not a huge material guy. I'm never diving into Designer unless I have to. So how exactly did I make this? Pretty much as simple as it gets. I used Substance Alchemist, and I started with a standard tile. All I did was change some of these values here, bump up the normals with an adjustment, and then warp it just to get rid of some of these perfectly straight lines. And then I made two other accompanying materials that are just twice as many segments in height so that they fit into that bottom tile spot perfectly, right? From there, all I had to do was bring it into Substance Painter and mask things out. So if I go to this tool, it might be a little bit hard to see, but you can faintly see those red lines. And all I did was mask out pretty much exactly where I want these little ones to go, just like so. So pretty simple stuff. I'm gonna get that out of here, and I just use this plane to do so. So yeah, from there, all I did was recreate the basic shape of this and what I assumed to be the size. I got the conclusion of the size just by how big the character is and a couple other characters around here. It's a little bit tricky to know for sure just because the characters are all either elderly or younger children characters. So what I did was I made one 2 meter tall sort of character stand-in, and 2 meters is roughly the size of most game characters, and then one that's a little bit shorter than that, and I used this shorter one as kind of a guide to match images like this, for example, where there's two children talking, and just sort of block things out. Obviously we're never going to get this perfect, but it's just sort of shimmied the UVs a little bit and adjust the size to kind of match having this like kid standing in the corner here as best as I could. And then from there, I wanted to make sure I matched the pattern as much as I could. And this is where I could start to get things a little bit more exact. So if we look at these guys, for example, we can see exactly how wide it is. So if we're taking into account that these miniature split tiles are the same as one normal, they're about 8 wide. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And knowing that, I can essentially recreate this whole thing. So I have these blue guys representing these thin trim outlines, and I just have them going 8 across the same amount of times as there are patterns here. And with that done, things have pretty much all been masked out and ready to sort of be adjusted. I then have this green one going across that's the same width, just because we have this guy here. And this is also really important because it's going to show us how long that this has to be here if we know where this guy is going to be. So yeah, pretty useful stuff. Essentially, I just took everything that I could from the scene and dissected it. What do I think makes sense? And I figured, yeah, the one material probably makes the most sense. It's going to be saving some memory as well. It's just going to be easier for the artist to work with. And then just dissecting things based on scale and how many tiles across is going to let us know exactly how this thing is laid out. I did have to sort of blow up the UVs a little bit larger than I'd like to for this. So if I wanted to go back and make it perfect, maybe I would adjust how many tiles are on here. But for now, it's definitely something we can work with. And that's just kind of my process getting up to this stage here. This is just the layout, essentially. From here, what we can do is start going in and actually cutting out these shapes. And the really nice thing about this is that it's all symmetrical. So essentially, once we have a quarter of this done, we can just mirror it over and then shimmy some of the UV so it's not repeating too much. And we're pretty much golden at that point. So with that being said, with everything laid out and everything explained up until this point, we can go ahead, dive in, and start cutting this guy up and getting those patterns in there. Okay, so one quick thing before we dive into actually making the pattern itself. I made a really quick change here. All I ended up doing was taking this from a 5x5 pattern to a 4x4. And the reason I did that was after doing a little bit of thinking, I'm like, why do I have to blow up these UVs so much? Like we're losing some resolution by doing so. And I figured if I just want the tiles to be bigger, I could just have less of them in the 2K texture, and that way they'll naturally be bigger. And also just by looking around here, I noticed that it is about every 4 that these guys repeat, right? So we have this guy here and this guy here, which are the same. And it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, repeat. So just by looking into it a little bit more, I thought, yeah, it just makes sense to make the tiles bigger, have less of them, and then we can cut them up a bit more to break up the repetition. So yeah, with that change, we are good to start making this pattern. So the kind of main thing we're going to start with is making one of these big loops here. And once you guys see exactly how we're going to be doing that, I think everything else is just going to make a lot more sense. So let's go through a detailed explanation of this first one, and then from there it's just going to be a lot of repeating. If this looks intimidating right now, just remember that this is mirrored both horizontally and vertically. So once we have little bits done, it's going to be a much larger part of the actual floor than it appears to be. So let's start with one of these, and yeah, it'll only get quicker and quicker. So I have this divided up already, and we're going to start with this one here. And as we can see, we have the guides for the outside trim already lined up, and we know where it's going to be reaching to because we have this guy here that's going horizontal. So essentially it's going to be this blue curving and stopping at this green and curving back into this blue. So now that we know that and we have all that set up, it's going to be really easy to sort of get this all in place. And I'm going to be doing this by just cutting this up, and I'm going to be using booleans to do so. So I'm going to start with a cube, just something that gives us a lot of control. And scaling this guy up, and I'm just going to essentially make that rounded shape, which we're going to then use to cut out of the floor. So I'm just going to snap this here. I'm going to snap it to the other end here with vertex snapping, just holding V. I probably should have mentioned this before, but this is just something you can follow along with any software. This is more of a fundamentals tutorial than a specific how to use all these different features in Maya kind of tutorial. So if you're using Blender or Max, you can follow along as well. But I'm just snapping these to the sides here, filling up the correct amount of space that I want it to. And then just to get that round shape, I'm just going to be beveling it. So Control B, cranking it up so it's a full point and rounding it out. Now how round we have it here does matter. The rounder this is, the smoother, essentially the smoother that this turn is going to be, because these guys are straight on our trim sheet, right? And what's making them round is that we're manipulating the UV so that they wrap in a curved way, and the more polygons we have, the smoother that wrap is going to be, right? So if you want to save on your budget, you can make this lower, but it's going to look worse in the transition between the bricks. So you can crank it up. And also considering like how large of a mesh this is and how there's no real depth to it, I'm not too concerned with polygon count or anything like that with this. Just because if this is the size of a human, this is a gigantic mesh. And like I said, like it's very two-dimensional. Like it's not like there's any, like everything you see is everything that you get essentially. So it's not like we're loading in a lot of stuff that we're not using at any given time. So I'm not feeling too bad about cranking this up. Maybe 12 or so, like a little bit. Yeah, you can still see the faceting, but nothing too crazy. Let's go with 12. I think that should be pretty appropriate. I know sometimes with Maya that these guys don't get welded, so I'm going to weld these tips here just to make sure it's all good to go. And now we just need to make sure that we have it set up in a way where instead of just being this round shape, it has the actual second edge ring following this shape where we can map our bricks to. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the top and bottom faces here. I'm going to go into my top view here and hit Control E to extrude, and we're just going to offset this. So as you can see, this is where we're actually going to be laying the brick pattern into, right? And I'm just going to offset it until it's in line with these guides that we set out here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but obviously the closer it is, the more accurate it's going to be in our UVs. Probably going to have to do some tweaking anyways. Just going to get that pretty close. Can even go in and grab these guys on the end and snap them to exactly where they're supposed to be. Nice. We now have this sort of awkward end flap here, which I want to get rid of. So I'm just going to grab these faces here and delete them. And I guess we don't need this middle part either. But we do want to complete the shape, so I'm going to flatten this out and bring it to the end here. So as you can see, if I go just isolate these two, the idea is to Boolean this down and then fill in this area that's exactly one tile wide with these guys here, which is one tile wide as well, essentially. So that's kind of how I came to the conclusion here, and then we'll cut things up in here to change how this is filled up later on. I'm just mostly concerned about this shape here. So I'm going to be Booleaning this in, and in order to do a proper Boolean, I'm going to have to close everything off here, or Maya will not like that. So I'm just bridging this off, and then bridge this as well. So now we have a closed off shape. We can start doing our Boolean process. One thing about Maya, or 3D softwares in general, is that when you're sort of using a big n-gon like this and doing Booleans, it's not going to like it too much. So just to keep things really clean, I'm going to add a cut along here, just so that when we're doing our Boolean operation, it's just affecting this one square rather than this whole complex shape. It's just going to make Maya a little bit happier. So let's grab all these guys. I'm going to turn Preserve UVs on, make sure it's super straight, and just snap it to the end here. So we're only cutting into this one specific square. And with that done, we can go ahead and start our Boolean operation. So we can grab this guy first, this guy, and for Booleans I use DC Boolean Manager. It's a free plugin for Maya, but you can go ahead and just go to Mesh Booleans and Difference if you don't have this installed. But with the Difference option selected, I'm going to do New Boolean Operation. It's giving us some troubles. Very typical Maya. I think I might need to close off some of these shapes here. So I'm just going to make this a not n-gon. Don't know why there's a vert there. Just because that might be part of the reason it's acting up. Just closing off some of these shapes. And then, of course, we're going to get rid of these later. It's just for the initial cut. Let's see if that helped. No. I guess we didn't triangulate that fully. Is that better? It is better. Okay. I guess we can work with that. I guess I just want it to be triangulated before we do it, and then we can just, yeah, get rid of that later. It looks like there's a tiny mesh sliver here. I'm just going to correct that by pulling out this edge. I'm going to turn off preserve UVs. And that should be good. I'm going to go to cleanup, delete history and base objects, which is just going to make this our actual mesh now. Going to get rid of this stuff so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. And nice. Looks like we got our shape in there pretty good. So let's just select these guys. Make sure everything's lining up, which it looks like it is. And what we're going to do now is fill this in and then map this to the smaller tile part of our texture. So let's grab this. Should be pretty straightforward. I'm just going to bridge that across. And essentially we could probably just select a bunch of these. Yep. So it looks like it's pretty much the same, but we have like geo that we can actually properly map here. And then for this last one, I'm going to have to actually extrude it out, which is going to have some wonky UVs. That's fine. And then I'll just snap that there. Or should I snap this here? Or maybe I'll merge them in the middle and have it be a bit of both. Okay, yeah, that seems to be symmetrical on both sides now. So, with all this done, let's go and map this to the trim that we set out, just by selecting all of this stuff and heading on over to our UV editor. So if we turn on our texture, we can take a look at, let's get that out of the way, let's turn off the grid. We can see we have this strip here, and essentially all we're trying to do is grab this and map it to this strip here. And to do that, I'm just going to grab these, and then we also have this guy here, which was extruded, so it's not mapped the same way. And all I'm going to do is hit gridify UVs. Yep. So this plugin's great. It just naturally, as you can see, makes it a perfect grid here. I'm then going to unfold by V just to make sure everything's evenly spaced. And as you can see, we have that totally flattened out. Each program is going to have different align tools and straighten tools. Like Maya can do this in different ways. I just found this to be my personal favorite. You just hit straighten here to make sure it's all perfect. But let's just copy the texel density and paste it so we're very consistent here. And we can just lay this along this strip right here. I kind of want the ends to be in the grout for all of my seams and have that be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to lay it out on there pretty spot on. And now let's take a look at what it looks like here. So yeah, as you can see, it's taking on a very similar look. Let's get rid of the wireframe. Taking on a very similar look to this, where we have these sort of dual tiles. Seems like we got it right on the first try. It seems the slightly darker one is on the inside, and the lighter one's on the outside. I'm probably going to go in and tweak these colors. I think ours are a little bit off, but it'll be easier to tell once we're in Engine. I am noticing we're getting some slanted tiles here, while these ones seem to be a bit better. That's, of course, going to be a UV thing, so let's just see what's going on with this shell here. I'm just going to isolate it so it's easier to see. And it's probably to do with this funky edge that we have here. And I'm just going to try... Yep, that'll do the trick. Just unfolding it a bit, and now it seems a lot straighter. Cool. So now we have our first guy done here. The next thing I want to address is kind of the inside, because we're going to have to do some work to get rid of these horizontal trims that we have on the outside here. And this is going to be pretty simple. I'm sure you guys can tell just by how we did this trim, how we might be able to get away with doing this. One thing I do want to notice or point out though is this seems a little off. I'd like to have this grout line perfectly in the middle. So all I'm going to do is grab this and pull it until it's in the middle. So it's right at the top there and lining up with the rest of these guys. Cool. So that's our first part done. Yeah, let's move on to this middle part here. It seems like they're always cut down the middle from what I was able to see in the reference images. And then, yeah, it's like every 3 tiles, it then switches to this trim. So we'll probably just have to do a bit of tweaking here. I'm going to start by grabbing these two, and let's start where we just sort of have the ends lined up pretty perfectly, so we don't have to add a cut for as long as possible. So we have the tile ends just poking through, where you can see the grout. Very nice. I'm starting to notice some stuff here. I'm noticing that we have some overhang here, which I'm not a big fan of. I kind of want the grout line to end right at the end there. And when you look at this, it seems like these tiles match across, right? Let me see if I find a better example. Yeah, it's like these are always level with each other up until we get into these crazy curves. So I'd like to match that as well. I think we need to start by lining this up correctly. So we might have to do a little bit of tinkering, a little bit of faking it. But if I pull that back, yeah, that's not going to be level on both sides, is it? I might just have to grab these and manipulate them a little bit more. Let's see. Let's just tinker with this in real time and see what we can find out. So scaling it down does it, but now everything's off by a tiny smidgen. I'd rather just have it line up, because if I move this with it keeping the right texel density, it's all going to match up fine. The only problem is that we have this here where it's not perfectly lined up. And the solution to that is have one side be straight, and then one side we're going to slowly pull away. And just sort of have the stretching be done in the middle here, because that's not where we're going to have it lining up anyways. So let's see. We have this, and essentially, like, I can pull this forever, and this will always stay the same ratio, but one of these tiles is going to get screwed over, like that guy there. So what I'm going to do is pull this until this matches, and then just sort of massage out the difference in the middle. There we go. And then now this is kind of screwed up, but I can grab all these guys, making sure that the ends are in the same position, and then unfold by V. And it's just these guys that are going to be slightly stretched out differently, but now these guys are going to stay the same, and we have these same ratios all the way across. These guys are like the tiniest bit stretched, but like since it's spread across like 10 different divisions, you'll never ever notice it. It's the most minute stretching you can probably have. Cool. I'm glad that we found that solution. Sometimes I like pause the video and have to think about it, but I'm glad we figured it out on the spot here. So let's get this middle part done. And to do that, I'm just going to be adding in these cuts where we need them. Seems like this is 43%. I'll try and match that on this side. Essentially, if you want to make sure everything's perfect, just make sure you have preserve UVs on and flatten things out. Just going to make sure it's right on the grout line, so when we do add a seam, it's barely noticeable because the grout will match up with the grout pretty well. So now we can take this and going to break it into its own seam, and we can just sort of pull this up and just get rid of that entire part, right? And then the grout lines up with the grout. We're still lining up with the tiles on the side, and we can just sort of repeat that. Gonna have to do that one more time. About 75, which will be close to 25. Straighten that out. Make sure it's going along the grout line pretty smoothly. And break it into its own shell. It doesn't matter if this stuff is overlapping either. Like, that's not really any concern to us, but it's just easier to work with if I'm moving it only horizontal. So it's natural that I will go over a little bit, unless I pull it this way. I think this might be a bit easier. And as you can see, like, if things start to get too repeaty and you can start to notice the repetition a lot, you can just add more cuts and start replacing tiles individually. I think I will be going in and adjusting the pattern itself at some point to make it less noticeable that it's tiling. But until then, I'm just going to try and do what I can here to try and eradicate that look. Things are a little off. I kind of want to adjust this a little smidgen. Let me see if I turn off preserve UVs. Yeah, that's going to affect that as well, obviously. So what I'm going to do is just nudge the UVs. You don't really have to worry with tiling textures and stuff if you're like not having everything be perfect. You're always going to be adjusting things a little bit. I guess in this case, though, that is not what we're going for, because that's not going to keep it tiling properly. I didn't think about that. I guess with the line off, you really don't even notice. I think that's a bit overkill to be concerned about that. So I'm just not going to worry about that. It's probably the easiest solution. And then with this, I'm just going to repeat the same thing over again. Grab these guys, break the shell, and then finish this off. Nice. And it turns out pretty good. So yeah, there is some noticeable pattern repetition here. So one thing we can do is grab these guys, and since they're a different half, we can probably split them into their own UVs. And I'm just going to try this. I don't know how perfectly this is going to work, but if I just grab this and maybe rotate it 180 degrees, or maybe, what if I take a shell? I'm just trying to find ways to like manipulate the shells so they don't repeat as much. Like if I take this one shell in the middle and I flip it, flip along V, yeah, it's going to break up that. And if I take this one and rotate it, it's going to break up that pattern as well, and so on. Like you can see where I'm going with this. So just by breaking it up, as long as everything is laid out properly, we can start rotating these things. And even though this tile is the same as this tile, it's a bit harder to tell now just because the layout is slightly different and the angle is off. And they're further away from each other. So I think that works pretty good. For those of you wondering about the whole N-gon situation, like, oh, these are all these exposed you know, this face has so many sides, right? It has like 10 sides or whatever. We don't need to worry about that. It should actually be totally fine. If we import this into a game engine, it's going to automatically triangulate it. And this entire surface is completely flat. So there's kind of no way it can triangulate it that's going to super break things. It's obviously ideal to go in, and maybe we'll do this at the end, and you know, manually close this stuff off. But if you do bring this into a game engine as is, like, this is probably pretty fine the way it is already. So I'm not too worried about that. We'll give it a shot. If it's broken, I'll clean it up for sure. But as you can see, that's how we got the first of this pattern in. If we go back to our main image here, this guy is complete. I could literally take this and, you know, delete this half, move the pivot in the middle, and do like boom, let's mirror it X, boom, let's mirror it Z. And now we have 4 of these done, right? So as you can see, we're just gonna have to do 1, 2, 3, 4 more for this corner, and then some of the middle things, and we're essentially done. Of course, we're gonna shimmy up some UVs here and there, but it's a relatively quick process. So the rest of this is actually going to be pretty similar to what I just showed you here, so I might go through it a little bit faster. So yeah, I think I'll speed over it, and then if there's anything to note, I'll either slow down or do some commentary on it. But I still want to show off everything that I'm doing here. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with this, and hopefully that was pretty clear. At any point, you guys can leave some comments. I'm always active in there as well, so let me know. But yeah, that's the basic gist of this pattern. So let's go ahead and finish it off, and I'll see you guys in just a moment. Alright, so I've gone ahead and sped up this portion of the video. This might have been about 2 hours of footage, and I've condensed it down to about 10 minutes. It's still something you can follow along with. I didn't want it to be going too fast. But yeah, I figured that this is just a lot of repetition and going over the exact same techniques I just went over. But I did want to break down some of these things that are a little bit more noteworthy. So the first thing that's going on right here is... I guess I did this early in the morning. I counted exactly how many tiles there was left to right, but I was counting the wrong part, and I totally didn't even count the amount of tiles vertically. So here I am just adjusting things. I missed an entire one of these bumps going horizontally on each side, so I just extended that to the left, and then I extended how tall they were as well. So I was on the right track, I just didn't fully count things. It didn't incorporate everything I needed to. But the nice thing about having one of these complete is that, as you can see, I can go ahead and use that and cut it up and move it around everywhere. And as I'd mentioned before, with the way this pattern naturally is, I can just sort of cut things and mirror it on the X and Z axis, and we're going to get through this pretty quickly. So just adding in these extra humps where I need them to be, getting in the base patterns, and then the only slightly more complicated part will be when I have to overlay one of the humps over the sort of 3 that are already laying there. So all I'm going to be doing for that is cutting it out, as you'll see. But yeah, I'm just going to be popping in and out here, commenting on a couple things that I think need a little bit more clarification. But for now, I'll just let this play through. For those of you who do want a slightly slower version of this, I'm going to be including all of the Unreal project files in the description below, and with that I'll be including this part of the video not sped up, in case you wanted to watch it a lot slower and get a much better idea of my thought process. But like I said, I think this should be fine. I just thought that'd be a nice bonus to throw in there. But anyways, I'm going to let this play out, and like I said, if anything is super noteworthy, I'll jump back in and explain what's going on. So this is the part I was mentioning just a second ago. Probably the only somewhat complicated part is where I take this pattern and I need to put it on top and sort of blend it into itself. And to do this, all I did was line it up with exactly where it had to be. And as you can see, I just grabbed the cut tool and just essentially traced over it. This way I can snap the vertices to be in line pretty much perfectly. As long as I preserve UVs on, I can just sort of snap things in place, and sometimes you have to switch between turning it on and off depending on how close things are, and if you are going to be essentially moving vertices past where the grout line is, for example. I sometimes just keep preserve UVs off, which stretches things a tiny bit, but it's really not the biggest deal in the world with a lot of this stuff. My biggest concern is having no visible seam lines and just having all the seams right in the grout there. So if things are slightly bigger by like a centimeter or so, I'm really not too concerned about that. But as you can see, now that I have sort of half of this done, I can cut it and move it over and get it into place. The only thing that I think might trip people up with this process is, you can kind of see it here, is there are some times where I line things up that I duplicated and I have two edges sort of snapped beside each other and they're totally flush, but one edge will have a vertice where another edge doesn't have a vertice. Even though it's totally fine to have n-gons and faces with more than 4 sides, there should never just be like a vertice floating on a different edge. Like everything should be closed off. So if there's a vertice overlapping with an edge of another mesh, I'll go to that mesh and I'll make sure I add a vertice right there and merge them just so that there's no like open flaps of geometry. I want everything to be watertight and sealed. So I don't care if there's a 20-sided face, but I just want to make sure every face is properly sealed. Just so we're not having any kind of weird issues, and I want the UVs to be just sort of one solid chunk, essentially. I don't want things to be in a position where if I grab a vertice and lift it up, like a hole appears. That's a big no-no. But yeah, as you can see here, what I'm doing now is really just starting to fill in some of these extra spaces. This is very similar to filling in the rounder shape, the rounder pattern that we did earlier, where I'm essentially just filling it up as much as I can, and then where that sort of darker, thinner trim comes in, I'll just add a cut and I'll shimmy the UVs a little bit. As you can see, I'm just sort of doing that wherever it needs to be done. And I think for some people who are a little bit more new to this, they might be wondering like, oh, I always thought like you should only ever add geometry or only ever add edges wherever we're changing the silhouette of a pattern or something. Like, aren't we adding a lot of extra geo that we don't necessarily need with this? And to that I say, yes, you're right. But when you're modeling to a pre-existing texture like a trim sheet or a tiling texture, sometimes the only way to get things to be representing the way you want is to add a texture seam somewhere and to cut the texture of the pattern that you're working off of. So in this case, if it's necessary, I think it's totally fine. Yeah. The next thing that's going on here, and you might have saw it for a second, is I have the whole pattern in place, but the center wasn't actually a proper square, so what I had to do was go in and shimmy this section just one tile down so that the middle is a proper symmetrical shape, because we're going to be putting a circle in the middle, not an oval. I was a little bit confused as to what was going on there, so nothing too crazy. It's just when there's so much going on, it's easy to overlook some things. And then right here is probably one of the more, I guess, quote-unquote complicated parts. It's still pretty simple, but there were some smaller tiles, as you could see in the scene. And to get those, all I did was cut these mini guys in half and essentially just replace one of these quarter shell pieces with a different color, just to sort of get those inner tiles to have like a proper turn to them. Which is simple enough. Here I am now adding just the circle in the middle. I just brought a cylinder in and roughly brought it to the same size as the pattern we made earlier, just to keep everything super consistent. Essentially just, yeah, same as before. All I'm going to have to do now is merge these guys, and turning preserve UVs on, I can shimmy some things forward, add some extra edges where I have to vert snap them together. One thing you probably noticed is there's a lot of mirroring, especially anything that's close to one of those vertical or horizontal axes where I'm flipping on. Like there's just things that are mirrored right beside each other. Obviously, I'm not happy with that, so after this video recording, I went in and I did move some things around, but that's just one thing to note with this. Yeah, you're not going to want everything to look like it's been purposely mirrored, especially like in the middle or along any of these axes points, but essentially I'm going to be doing that off camera. And here all I'm really doing is adjusting that border that we made at the very, very start. I was quite a bit off in the scale, like I said. I wasn't fully taking into account everything. And then the very final thing here is there's a bit of a trim around the edges, which is kind of cool. I wanted to include that, but it's just this these two thin tiles around the border, just to sort of frame everything, which I found pretty nice. And then for this, I'm also going to be having to do that little technique where I cut a quarter stone out of there just to sort of have the pattern stay consistent all the way around. But that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, like I said, you can leave them in the comments. And if you also want to see this slower, I'll have that in the Gumroad download in the description below. But once we're getting past this part, I'm going to show you what the scene looks like all set up inside of Maya, so we can see a proper comparison to how this actually looks to the in-game scene as well. I think it turned out pretty cool, and yeah, once we're done this, we can start working on a bit of a damaged version and see how we can add even more detail to this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed watching this part, and I'll catch you guys inside the engine. Alright, so really quickly before we dive into any destruction techniques or move this into a place even further, what I wanted to do is show you how this all comes together inside of Unreal. So here's the reference image, the main one that we were going off of, just to sort of see how the scene is all set up in Nier Replicant, and this is how I have put it together inside of Unreal Engine 5. To be honest, I just wanted any excuse to get inside of Unreal Engine 5 and start playing around with some of the lighting. This is a really basic setup. I've just used some default cubes and lined them up, and not very good at that. But I just wanted to get some of that cool bounce light and see how things turn out. But as you can see, it's pretty much one-to-one. The material is obviously a little bit different, and this is quite a bit more saturated. But I'm happy with how this turned out. And if we go ahead and hit play, we can go see how this looks in-game. We're running around. Things are pretty much to the same scale as they were inside Replicant. We're getting some nice sort of reflections off the ground here. And more or less the main reason I wanted to make this tutorial to begin with was just to show you how much you can get away with tiling, textures, and trim sheets. It's pretty much just that. I found that when you're learning this stuff, there's such a heavy emphasis on making unique props, and everything gets their own textures and all that. And I find that stuff like this isn't really explained as well, and I would have really appreciated to learn this kind of stuff a long time ago, because I had no idea how you'd make something this big. I didn't know if it was like you would just give it like an AK texture or exactly how it'd be done. But as you can see, we're getting some really good resolution using only just one 2K texture for this gigantic space, right? If we want the floor to sort of remain clean, this is fine, but we're going to be adding some changes as well. But you could do a lot with just vert painting this, or adding some decals on the floor, anything like that. But yeah, I just really wanted to hop in here before we did anything else to show that, hey, you can get some really good quality over a large area of space using just one 2K texture. And I'm really happy with kind of this part and how it's turned out. I did keep in a couple things to show you some errors that I had. So as you can see, some of these parts along the seam line are mirrored over, and it looks pretty bad. So I'm going to go in and fix that stuff up. I don't want any patterns like that to sort of have a sort of hot dog or butterfly wing effect on these lines here. It looks pretty bad. Same here. Same here. It doesn't help that they're all the same pattern, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to go in and clean that up. But all in all, I think we've done a pretty good job matching the village library from Nier Replicant. Really love the new lighting setup. Obviously, this isn't a lighting tutorial, and I could probably tweak some settings to get this a little less blotchy. But it's been a lot of fun getting this in here. So, with that said, let's go ahead and take this a step further and see how we can do a bit of a destruction pass on this guy. Cool, so now that we have our pretty much main floor pattern all set up, everything's in Unreal Engine, I thought what we could do now is just a damage pass and show how we can sort of take this a little bit further and make some cool, interesting sort of bumps up in quality and just tell a bit more of a story. Sometimes you have an environment where you want something that's a little bit more damaged, and maybe you might be wondering how we can go about doing that. So I thought we could go over a couple techniques as to how we can sort of bring this up quite a bit. I'm going to be focusing on just this circle area for the damage. Obviously, all these techniques apply to any floor pattern or anything that sort of follows these rules, but I figured if we did it for the whole thing, it would take quite a while. And I think the circle is just a really good opportunity to sort of isolate some damage. The first technique that I want to go over is something really basic, but it does add quite a bit of punch to the scene. And that's just going to be if we extrude some of these tiles a little bit. Now this isn't like super damage heavy, but if you have a damaged area and you I just want to quickly get some variation in there, or even if it's not necessarily damaged, maybe if it's more of like a cobblestone floor or something. Just doing this really pushes it a little bit further. So I thought we would just do that really simply. And what I mean by that is pretty much just sort of taking our cut tool, finding these tiles that we want to have a little bit more 3D definition, and let's see here, sort of cutting them out, and then like just straight up extruding them a little bit so they have something where the light can sort of catch on it. Obviously for something like this, it doesn't make too much sense. That's why I'm saying I would probably isolate this to more of a damaged area or a different type of material altogether. But if we extrude this and scale it in a little bit so light hits off it a bit nicer, we'll definitely notice that in the engine. You can even see here like it pops out a little bit, and obviously just having one, it looks a little bit silly, but if we do it for a couple, it'll start to sell this effect that maybe, I don't know, there was an earthquake or something caused this to be a little ruffled and cause some irregularities, I guess, in the tile. So let's do that for a few more. Scale this guy in. Maybe we'll do one more right here. You can do as many or as little as you want. There's really no specific rule to this. And it's just one of those things where I think the more you commit to it, the more appealing it's going to look. Also, of course, you can scale things in a little bit. As you can see, the UVs don't get adjusted to the edge here, which is fine for something like this. In a third-person scenario, when you're this far away, you'll never really notice it, but ideally you would map this to either the side of the tile or the grout or something like that. For this case, just because it's so hard to see, I'm not super concerned about it. It just really isn't the biggest deal. I'm going to go ahead and get maybe one of these rounder pieces as well. Can bring that up. Maybe for this specifically, I'm going to hit Control E, offset it in a little bit so it's even everywhere, and then raise it up. And let's have one more inset, something, I guess right here would probably do, another rounded one. And just get those grout lines. And let's offset this a little bit and sink it in. Okay, so just really, really basic stuff. But if we go ahead and export this to Unreal Engine, export selection, floor main, and we dive in here, so we can see it's just super flat right now. We can re-import this guy, and yeah, we have a little bit more detail going on. I'll play from here, and it's nothing groundbreaking for sure, but it's just a subtle detail that adds a little bit more. Like if there was a lot of damage or a lot of rubble around here, I think this would fit in pretty nice. You could also just cut tiles out and have the ground underneath. But I just wanted to go over this just to explain that like you can model to pre-existing textures. Like we've been doing that the whole time, but you can take it a bit further and add some depth like this. It does add a bit. This might not be the perfect material for it, but it's definitely something that you can get some benefit out of. And as you can see, it's like you don't really see these grout lines pretty much at all, so I'm not too worried about mapping those or getting that too precise. But yeah, that's kind of the foundation of that. I do want to take it quite a bit further though, so I'm going to undo all of this. And I might be adding a bit more in later, maybe with a bit more intention, something a bit more specific. Can also do it for these tiles around the edges here. But what I want to do is actually model out a set of tiles, various broken tiles, some fully intact tiles that match this pattern perfectly. And then what we can do is we can cut out certain tiles, like very, very similar to what we did before. Something like so. And then let's say, let's make it the proper depth. I'm not exactly sure how deep this tile would be. Maybe like so. And then what we could do is with that deleted, have then a final tile model. Let's just pretend for now that this is that tile. Obviously this is super rough. Let me just snap this into position. Like so. And we could have like a detailed tile model that matches this. And then we could say like, oh, a corner is cut off or something. Or it's like a little misshapen from some damage, like so. And then we have some like dirt underneath or something like that. And if you start slotting these new tiles that we made out, we can get a really cool broken effect. So if we go back to this guy, this is kind of going to give us a hint as to how many we can fit on here. With these actual model tiles, we know that they're the same size as these tiles here, but I guess we do have to accommodate that since we're UVing all of this, there's sides to the tiles. If you want to have it double-sided, you can model the bottom of tiles. So all those things are something you have to keep in mind, but essentially we have room for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yada yada yada, tiles that we can fit on here. So just if you're wondering like, oh, how many tiles can I fit on this 2K, we can just reference back to this and be like, okay, for every tile that's double-sided, it's going to take up a little bit more than 2 of these guys. So when you're going through that, you can sort of make sure you're not modeling more than you need to, and you can get some good variety in there. So I'm going to go ahead and make just a really basic kit of broken tiles here. I'll probably have a couple square ones, and then since all of these rounded ones around the edges are pretty much the same size, I'll have some rounded ones as well, and we can just sort of slot those out. Put a dirt material underneath, and then I think as well I'll be going over how we can vertex paint maybe some like spilling over dirt, or vertex paint some cracks around here as well. And I think that'll do it for this tutorial, really showing how we can push this over the edge and add some cool destruction to this. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and make that broken tile kit, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Alright, talk to you in a second. Alright, so I've gone ahead inside of ZBrush and made just a couple really basic tiles. Just a set of 5 just so we could fit it on 2K texture and make sure our texel density is matching everything. But I just wanted to get a bit of variety in here. So in the middle we have a just normal tile, then slightly more broken, bit more broken, pretty decently broken, and then one that's sort of split up into little pieces that I can go ahead and sort of sprinkle about wherever there's a little bit more damage. So I made this, just added some basic grout lines on the back, nothing too crazy. Made a low poly set of this as well, pretty much just by decimating this, so very quick, easy. Surely I could have gone in there and done a little bit more precise work, but I really wanted to do this to show you guys this new UV tool through Rhizome. So I said at the start of this video that this tutorial is sponsored by Rhizome UV. They've been super nice, and they reached out to me and asked if they could sponsor a video, and it turned out that this was a pretty good fit. So what you're seeing right now is kind of my very first experience in their software. It's completely 100% dedicated to UVing, and if you've ever had any issues with UVing or wanted to level up your UV game, I really recommend looking into them. Not only just for the software itself, but they also have a really good community. There's some good tutorials out there, and they have a Discord as well that goes over lots of really unique, awesome tips. So if you've ever been interested, I'll have links, of course, to all this in the description below. But even if you just want to join a community with more artists that you can sort of get advice from, I think it's worth checking out. But I found the software itself to be really easy to use. I probably only watched maybe like 10-15 minutes of tutorials, and then I'm like, screw it, I'm going to dive in and see how much I can figure out on my own. And it pretty much worked out quickly. I mean, I know these are really easy things to be UVing, but its unfold tool and its packing tool were both really good. And I really just scratched the surface. I only used a handful of tools, as you can see here, but there's a ton of menus, a ton of customization, and I saw some of the tutorials for just UVing using that software like hours long. So it goes deep, and if you want to really step up your UV game, I totally recommend them. I found the software pretty great, and as someone who's planning on switching to Blender soon, I've actually been looking for a proper UVing solution. I've tried out Blender for a couple things here and there, And the one thing that's really holding me back is I'm not a big fan of the UVing there. I know a lot of people end up using plugins or something like that. But I figured it might be good to use Rhizome because they have bridges between their software. So there's a bridge from Maya to Rhizome and Blender to Rhizome, whatever you need exactly. And yeah, I figured if I start using it, well, kind of in Maya, it's just going to transfer over to whatever software I need, and it's just going to be a little bit more intuitive. So I think I'm going to give that a shot. Really cheap for what it offers as well, and the people behind it really know what they're doing. The guy who has put together the majority of the software, from what I understand, is the person who actually wrote the initial code for Maya's UV software, and Maya's UV system is my personal favorite from what I've experienced so far. So knowing that and knowing that I can really trust this guy, I can't wait to sort of check out what this software has to offer, and I'll be using it moving forward quite a bit more. But anyways, wanted to just show you guys how it looks inside of here, and thank you once again, Rhizome, for sponsoring this video. Alright, so we're in the final stretch now, guys. As you can see, we're inside of Unreal now. And we just went over that we created some tiles here, so I have them imported. I gave them just some quick textures. All of them are sharing one sheet, and the material is based off of this ground material here. I was able to take the same base material that I was using inside of Alchemist, bring it inside of Substance Painter, and use that for a texture. So you can see it matches really, really well. If I were to leave this here, it just looks like a broken tile that is coming off of this floor, so there's quite a few variations, and we're going to be able to do some cool work with that. Another thing that I did, and this is going to also help bring it all together, is I've turned this into a vertex paint material. So if I go to paint here, and just using one of the channels, let's see, let's bring this guy way up. I can start painting in some damage, as you can see. So that's going to help blend this in quite a bit more. I didn't go over this specifically because I think it's a little out of the scope of this tutorial. But if you are interested in how to set up all this vert paint stuff, I'll link some resources in the description below. Or if you want to reverse engineer the material I made here, like I said, I'll have the project files on my Gumroad link in the description if you want to check that out. But just a really, really basic thing here. I took the same material, added some dirt on one and some cracks on the other, and just for blending with some stuff. But we're now going to be putting everything together. So we have all that. Let's go back over to Maya. What we're going to do is that same technique from earlier and just sort of cut things out. But now we're going to have other tiles to fill inside, and we're going to be able to paint a little bit. So let's go ahead and get that started. I have some tiles that are a little bit more broken, so I think they're going to work good for these kind of rounded pieces. Of course, if I were to be trying to make this as efficient as possible, I probably would have made some tiles that fit these rounded ones as well, and these straight ones here. But like I said, for the sake of this tutorial, I just want to keep it all contained here. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete that for now. I think what I'm going to end up doing is just deleting these and then replacing them inside of Unreal with those new tiles that we have, so I'm not too worried about exactly what's going to be missing here. Get rid of a couple there, maybe one over here. I'm just trying to think of some interesting patterns. Something like this. And obviously this is one of those things now where it's like all the pieces are in place. The more time and effort you want to put into this, the better it's going to end up looking. And this is like a pretty self-contained area, right? So it's not like this is going to have a huge impact on the entire floor just because it's kind of small. But if you wanted to go in and do an entire pass on everything, like that's going to have a pretty big wow factor at the end of the day. And let's do a couple more here. Cut this here. Now you might be noticing that like stuff like this, like these edges are tiny. I would probably take this vert and move it over here and snap it and just pretend it was always that way, but for now I'm going to leave it just to see how things turn out. And then, yeah, let's just do one more, might as well. We made quite a few tiles, so we might as well get our use out of them. This is also helpful because with vertex painting, the more vertices we have here, the more detailed the blend is going to be. So doing extra cuts like this is actually helping quite a bit at the end of the day. What I'm going to do then is now extrude this down. I want this to be roughly the depth of the size of our tiles here. So I have these tiles, and I'm just going to sort of use them as our scale to see how deep we should make these. This doesn't have to be exact or anything. It's pretty loose, but I'm just going to extrude that down and just like snap it to the height there, and set these guys back to where they were. So now we have some missing tiles here, which is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and hide these tiles. From here, what I'm going to do is just fill these holes, just so we have space to put something underneath of it. I'm going to project this from Y. So if I can go grab my UV tools, project this from Y. Very good. This doesn't really have to be anywhere specific, but just want to make sure that they have the same texel density as everything else. So paste that in there. These guys are going to be getting a totally different material that I made that is just for like some kind of exposed concrete or grout or something like that. And then if you wanted to, you could of course go in and remap this stuff, which is probably a good idea. I'm going to see how much I can get away with just automatically doing this, because they're going to be getting the same material, so I'm really not like super worried about how these look. Obviously you want to spend a bit more attention to this, but I'm just going to go ahead and hit, let's see, it's been a while since I've done automatic UVs. It's usually a pretty bad practice, but take that, and all I did off camera was paste the same texel density. But essentially now, I'm just going to make sure these guys have a different material so that in Unreal Engine we can assign our separate material. So have all of that selected. I'm going to assign, let's just give it something red so we remember it's different. And I'm going to go ahead and export this over to Unreal, and I'll go catch you guys once we're over there. Alright, so I've gone and re-imported this now, and we have our missing tiles in here, which is already adding like a kind of a cool look, but obviously we want to take this a lot further. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up our mesh here, and as you can see we have a second spot now, since we added a second material in Maya, to import a material for this guy. I went ahead and made this kind of exposed concrete material, and I'm just going to go ahead and browse for it, and we can slot that in there. So now we have this kind of exposed concrete underneath. We can change some of the parameters on that, but like as you can see in here, I'm not really expecting it to be anything too crazy. I just kind of wanted to get a very basic job done. But from here what we can do is now take these individual tiles and start slotting them in. So this is 7 different tiles. I'm just going to lay them out here. I don't know if we're actually going to end up using all of them. But the cool thing about this is that we can kind of put some on top of each other if we need to. I wanted to make some smaller chunks as well so we can get a lot of reuse out of them. But for example, like this corner piece here, even though it's rounded, I didn't have to make a specific round tile. I could just reuse this. So I'm going to hold Alt and drag out, which is going to make a duplicate. And let's see if this guy fits in here, hopefully. I'm going to turn rotation snap on, since everything's on a grid here. But I can just kind of plop this guy down so he fits in there. Position him to be a little bit more snug. Maybe rotate him a little so it looks like a little out of place. And then maybe grab this small chunk, which I feel like we're going to get quite a bit of use out of. And see if we can slot that in there as well. So now we have like a broken tile in there. I feel like this ground material isn't exactly what I want. I'm going to see if I can change the color to something that matches a bit better. I feel like it should be something a bit warmer. Not totally colored, but I feel like it was popping a little bit too much. Color contrast. Let's see, maybe I want it to be less noticeable, that's the problem. Maybe a bit darker. Yeah, I just want the tiles to be popping a little bit more. I can always adjust that later. But there's like one piece. Let's have one that's maybe a little bit more noticeable. I'm going to turn my camera speed down a little bit so it's easier to work with. I'm even okay with shrinking it a little bit. Let's turn off that snap. Just so I can rotate it a little and have it stand out a little bit more. This one feels like it'd be a little bit more appropriate to have like a corner piece kind of broken off. And then for this one I could even scale it up a tiny bit. Do something like so. And as you can see, like as we fill this in, it's starting to take shape a little bit more, tell a bit of a story. So let me go ahead and fast forward adding all these guys in. You can kind of do this any way you want to, and like I said, this is just one of those things where the more you contribute to it, the better it's going to look. So this is just all contained to this one circle in the middle, but as you can imagine, if we did it all the way across something, or had it kind of fading in, or just like one part broken, maybe near the entrance or something, you could tell a pretty cool story with it. But it's definitely nice to kind of have this breakup and variation in something that's otherwise just the same tiling pattern over and over again. So let me go ahead and do this, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side in just a second. Alright, so as you can see, just by having all that stuff set up, we can really quickly just start adding tiles in here and breaking it up. I think it works the best in situations like this and this here. Also having some of this stuff overflowing. I feel like I'd want to spend quite a bit more time actually laying this out. And I'd probably want to cut out more specific shapes and stuff like that, but we can start to just get details in here pretty quickly once things are set up. Yeah, stuff like this I'd probably rather have an actual tile cut out or something. But yeah, it really doesn't take too long to really fill this up. Another thing that I wanted to go over is like these tiles here. I always think it's cool to have like a full tile made. That way, even for like undamaged areas, just to add some kind of breakup or variation. Just like we kind of went over before, I can just have this guy here. And if I line it up properly, ideally I'd still have some of the grout around the bottom showing. So maybe I'd want to shrink that down a tiny bit. But just by having that there, and then say I have like another one, I'm just going to do this very quickly over here. And I don't know, one over here. Maybe not that extreme. But just having them sort of pop out a little bit. You can see like, oh, if I was running around, like this adds some variation now in the actual height, and now there's some geometry involved. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of those for now, though. This is kind of like the main idea as to what I'm going after. So then once you have this, you could then quickly grab your paint tools And now the brush is super big. And just kind of push those details a bit further. Have some cracks kind of around some of the exposed areas where it makes a bit more sense. I feel like areas like this would probably have a bit more going on. Like so. And you can start to really see it coming together. I think I added, I can't remember what all of these are, dirt for one of them, so maybe, yeah, that's quite extreme. But have some dirt. Let's turn the strength of that way down. Some dirt closer to the areas where it's a bit more exposed. And then maybe even over here as well. As if maybe some of the dirt or something that was residing underneath sort of spilled through. But you can see we're really starting to get a nice floor going on. Like I said, I would probably cut this out a little bit differently, and maybe I will take it a little bit further for some beauty renders. But by sort of painting some of this detail in here, and mixing it with meshes and stuff, you can see this is kind of the method we'd go for adding this kind of detail and stuff like that. That's how we can get away with using just one texture for the whole floor and still get variation. Because you look at this, and if we run up to it, it doesn't really read like, oh, this is just one tiling material, because there's so much going on now. We have like little storytelling bits where something like punched the ground here and it partially exploded, and there's tiles slipped over, and there's dirt leading out of it, and there's cracks spilling over. So if you put a bit more love and attention into this, it'll go a long way. There's definitely some tiles that are a little bit higher than they should be, but the depth is such a warm welcome to this stuff. Let me just see if I can get this a little bit tighter, and then we'll run over to it again and see how everything's looking. Didn't realize just how floaty some of these things were. This guy, of course, makes sense, but even then I might lower him a bit. But it's just tweaks and tweaks from this point on. And like I said, I'd probably take it back to Maya, and I might even also want to adjust this material a little bit. Reduce how intense some of the coloring is. So I feel like some parts of this are getting a little bit noisy. Yeah, obviously we don't want it to be like that. Somewhere around here. And then coloring, a lot of it has to do with the lighting setup we have. So I would probably want to go in and do a whole pass on all this stuff. This is obviously very, very basic right now. But this is the point where I'm like, okay, I kind of just want to start tweaking everything. But let's not start doing that. That's going to lead to way more fixing and changes and stuff like that. Maybe do want to reduce some of these effects here. Have them be a little bit more targeted. Just adding some cracks where they should be. I also have a layer for cracks and dirt at the same time, but that might just be a little bit too intense for most areas. Maybe around here. Yeah, and it's just going to be a matter of tweaking a lot of this stuff now. which probably isn't the most entertaining stuff for a tutorial. But let me quickly go through here. I want to make sure that I have the best settings and stuff. Make sure I balance everything. For example, this underneath dirt, I still feel like we could probably tint to be a little bit better. Maybe darker is the way to go to help make it pop. Yeah, I'm already feeling that quite a bit more. And yeah, we could just keep going through and keep tweaking stuff. But I think that's probably a good place to leave it. I think this is kind of everything I need to explain to kind of get the ideas in your head as to how we might approach something like this. And you can see we're getting some kind of cool floor depth and stuff. Just using a few things, just using one tiling material. A couple variations of it for blending if you want to go ahead and do that, and then one set of tiles here. So pretty much all comes down to how you lay out your UVs to get cool patterns like this. But I thought I'd throw in the damage pass as a little bit of a bonus here near the end of the video. I highly recommend when you are playing games, go ahead and look at the floors and see how they're put together. Most of the time it will just be a tiling texture, but it's usually laced with some kind of mesh, whether it's just like a basic extrusion like we went over earlier, or sometimes a bit more intense, something like this, where they actually go ahead and make additional models and stuff like that. But I'm going to go ahead and keep pushing this a little bit further, and then hopefully we have some nice beauty shots to show at the end of it. But yeah, I'll see what I can do to improve the quality, and then catch up with you guys once I have things a little bit further. So here we are in the final version. I've gone ahead and spruced things up a little bit, as you can see, mostly in the set dressing, just to kind of pull it all together. But I also changed some things here as well. So let's just kind of ignore all this. I kind of went a little crazy with the lighting and the dust, and trying to get this a little bit closer to the source material. But if we zoom in here, all I've really done is I've gone ahead and just adjusted some of the materials on the tiles, the color of this kind of dirt or grout underneath, and used the vertex painting a little bit more in our favor here. So I think this is probably a good place to leave it. Let's go ahead and run up to it and see how it looks if we're in game. And yeah, if we're standing here, I'm pretty happy with these results. I do think if this was like a proper game, of course I'd want to spend a bit more time. I think especially on these actual tiles themselves, I think there's some ways we could make this pop a little bit more. But when we're looking at the damage and we're looking at the layout as a whole, I think for the sake of this tutorial, we've definitely achieved what we've set out to do here. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. If we remember back to the reference, everything is matching up with the pattern pretty well. We've utilized just a single tiling trim sheet to sort of get this entire thing done. And then in the middle here, we pulled out a new bag of tricks to sort of add in some meshes, add in some vertex painting, and really bring it up to the next level. So if you applied this across the entire thing, you can imagine that we can get some pretty cool effects. But yeah, I really encourage you as you're playing games from now on to look at the floor, see how they've done it. Techniques like this kind of happen all the time. If it's more of a stylized game, you might notice the method we went over earlier, where we're just popping out bricks by extruding them. I was playing Valorant the other day and noticed that all over the place. But in more detailed games, you might see it like this. A really good example that recently came out is Resident Evil 8 has a ton of really detailed floors, just like this. So if you're watching any gameplay or you're playing that, yeah, look at the floor, see how they've done it. This is how I'd personally go about it. Hopefully you guys learned something from this. And all in all, I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. I think we've gone ahead and achieved something pretty cool, and yeah, hopefully you guys all learned something from this tutorial. So with that, this tutorial is complete. Thank you guys for checking this out. If you guys made it this far into the video, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this new format. I kind of just wanted to do something a bit more fun, a little bit more personal. The past few tutorials have taken quite a bit out of me, and they've been stretched out over such a long period of time. I kind of wanted to try something a little bit new, a little bit more fun, and like I said at the start, I've been really enjoying the Nier series, and I wanted to do a tutorial like this anyway, so I thought combining the two would be pretty cool. If you guys want to see more stuff like this that's a little bit more personal, or maybe have some games tied into it, I'd love to hear about that. Any specific games you'd like to see covered as well, that would be great to hear as well. But otherwise, I'll probably have some more tutorials coming down the pipeline, not too far off into the future, so if you're interested in this kind of content, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. And if you're interested in the project files or anything we talked about in this video, feel free to check out the description below. But anyways guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. Once again, my name is Dylan, hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next video. See ya.